I can promise you, everybody listening to this podcast right now knows at least one person in their circle of family and friends who's suffered harmful side effects from this vaccine. That's why there's distrust about this.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, September 2nd. I'm Andrew Waldworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, guys, it's September, lots of things going on, but let's start with the Department of Defense, as it's still known. Donald Trump wants to rename it the Department of War. Trump said on Monday, as Department of War, we won everything. I think we're going to have to go back to that. So, Tom, what do you think of the name change? Do you like it? And what's the rationale for going back to the name that was used in the 1940s?
Well, according to Trump, he likes the sound of it. He said it's got a stronger, it's a little stronger sounding. But it is one of those things. Trump fixates on these things, and they're little things, but they often have meaning behind them, right? I mean, this is all part of his idea that America needs to be respected again in the world. We need to be strong again in the world. We've been taken advantage of by all of these players around the globe. We've been ripped off, and he wants to put an end to that. And he does that with, all sorts of gestures, big and small, meaningful and not so meaningful. And so this is just another one. And apparently, according to the reporting, though, he's been talking about this for a while. He brought it up at the NATO summit. He's been focused on it even since before he took office the second time. So we'll see whether he's able to get this done. It's supposed to be done through Congress, but they're looking at other options, which I don't know what that means.
Carl, are you up for the Department of War again?
Well, it was known as the War Department. That's during the Civil War, it was called that. World War I, World War II. Trump's not wrong that when it was called the War Department, United States didn't tend to lose wars, but I don't think changing the name is why we got bogged down in Vietnam. I think it was because we had no business in Vietnam. But Trump wouldn't know that because he missed that war. What was his
Bone spurs?
Bone spurs. If young men like Donald Trump had gone on, if we'd given our best, we'd sent our best. Maybe you're gathering I'm not too thrilled with this. In a serious vein, Andy, and I know you have some thoughts about it too, but one thing I'll say is that Department of Defense is, maybe seemed anodyne to President Trump, but we talked last week about the 20-year anniversary of the storm, as it's still known in New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, and George W. Bush was criticized, and Tom and I think probably unfairly for a slow response, but he learned his lesson on the public relations aspect. I mean, when this devastating tsunami hit in Indonesia and Thailand a year later, he was quick off the dime. He still got criticized, by the way. You can't please people, but he was very quick, and he sent the United States Navy to deliver these supplies that saved many people's lives and probably did as much good in a week as as the Peace Corps does in a year. And I'm not certainly criticizing the Peace Corps, but it was just a great humanitarian gesture, and only the United States Navy could have pulled it off. And when Pete Hegseth goes on and on about we need war fighters and we don't want a woke military, I understand what he's getting at, but would that humanitarian effort?
What are you saying? Really, we wouldn't do humanitarian effort if we changed the name to
that's what
the War Department?
The purpose of the U.S. military has evolved beyond even defense, and so even defense doesn't fully incorporate it. But I'm saying we're moving in the wrong direction, Tom. I mean, in terms of symbolically, that's what I'm saying.
Carl.
Yeah.
I think Carl's got about half a point there, right? Here's the way I view it. I think that when we changed the name to the Department of Defense, and you got to remember this is 1947, so this is nuclear weapons.
Carl was in college then.
Yeah, right. But
you're right, Andy. It was 2 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right. So it signals to the world that we are not an imperial power. We're going to use our military might to defend our interests, defend our way of life, but we weren't in the business of making war. And that seemed to be a signal that made sense. And I do think that the national conservatives, Trump and that crowd, they have this worldview where that's naive and that's over. bottom line, the U.S. is not really any different than any other country. And so we should pursue our interests narrowly. And yeah, we should have a Department of War, and we should have tariffs against countries that are weaker than we are. And that our values are not really what this country is about. What this country is about our interests. And I think that this sort of reflects that. Tom?
Well, look, I mean, and
So
how did that
Tom,
go?
two dissents,
How,
different opinions.
and how did that go when our foreign policy was based on our values that we tried to export around the globe? How did that go?
We brought 1 billion people around the globe out of poverty. We had world peace. We haven't
Lost
had a nuclear
thousands of
state.
American lives and spent trillions of dollars trying to,
Well, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a
get
minute.
purple fingers in the Middle East. I mean,
Andy's talking about PEPFAR. He's not talking about
oh, well, look, it's
invading the wrong
all part of the
country.
same. I don't know that I don't know that it was a bad thing for Donald Trump. And by the way, let's just say, names are names. Donald Trump has reshaped the Republican Party single-handedly in the last 10 years from being a party that was interventionist abroad to a party that is now saying, look, we do need to put American interests first, and we don't want to get involved in these foreign wars. And he has done more, I think, to prevent war and bring people home from war than any recent president. So let's at least
Yeah,
give him
but Tom,
credit for that.
that's not what this is about, Tom. This is moving in the
But
other
it's
direction
changing
from
the name
that.
to the War
This
Department doesn't mean we're going to go make war all around the world.
No, we're from Denali Mountain to the Gulf of Mexico. We're all going to be one big happy.
All right. Well,
The
look,
Gulf of America, Carl, get it right.
well, we'll see what happens with Greenland and Venezuela. Now
Mount
that there's other
McKinley
places.
and the Gulf of America.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to talk about, as long as we're talking about defense stuff, we got to talk about Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
Do we have to?
Well, he's repeatedly said that he won the Bronze Star for his service in Afghanistan. Now he admits that the claim was, quote, an honest mistake. But Carl, he served in the Army. He reached the rank of captain. He won a bunch of awards, just apparently not this one. And here's what he said when he was interviewed by Martha Raddatz over the weekend about this topic.
But in 2008 on PBS, they introduced you, Gwen Ifill, saying you had earned a Bronze Star medal. That's 2008. 2010, you were on the Colbert Show. When he said you had a Bronze Star, you did not correct him. You had to know you did not have one then.
Well, I did not go back and tell the Pentagon, hey, I was told to put this on my application, and didn't. And honestly, at that
But
point,
I'm not talking about the Pentagon. I'm talking about you knew in those interviews you did not have one.
No, because even at the time of those interviews, it wasn't something that I even thought about.
Boy, it was a tough interview, Carl.
I got to say, Andy, if you watched it, Martha's very professional, and but she could not hide her disillusionment. She didn't accept that answer, and she shouldn't have. I don't mean to be whimsical about it. The guy did serve, and he served his country. And I made a bone spur joke earlier. Wes Moore's made the same joke. So that there's a glass house issue for some American politicians. But this gets into that whole stolen valor thing, and it's not trivial, and it's not funny. And his explanation just beggars belief. A couple of years ago, it's 3 or 4 years ago, Tom Cavanaugh, who was our chief copy editor, nominated me for a Pulitzer Prize for commentary for my columns that I was writing every day, that I got a book out of, something on this date that happened that related to American history. I didn't ask him to do it, but if I had been given the Pulitzer, I would have thought I deserved it. But I didn't go around telling people I'd won it because Tom had nominated me for it, and say, well, I never checked with the Pulitzer Board. I never checked to see if they actually gave me the award that I was nominated for. It wouldn't have occurred to me to give that explanation when I was caught
And
out.
if someone identified you as a Pulitzer Prize winner, Carl, in an interview, would you have probably said,
That happens, Tom, because I was a member of the staff of the San Jose Mercury News that won the Pulitzer Prize for our coverage of the Loma Prieta earthquake. And if I have a chance, I always correct it. I always say, well, the staff won that award. Yeah, I worked on the story. I've got it on my wall, but I didn't win it personally. these distinctions with awards are important because they go to your integrity. And every every time should he be corrected? Should he interrupt the person? Maybe not. But he's the one who first told people. He's the one who put it in his literature. They only found this out from him.
Tom, is this how bad is this on a scale of 1 to 10?
You know, I've been going back and forth. I mean, my initial reaction was like, "Oh, he's done. He's cooked. He's never gonna survive this," because of the way that he handled that interview. I mean, it'd be one thing if he said, "Look, I'm sorry. But he's not saying that. He's saying, "Gee, I just didn't know," So he's running around claiming he won the Bronze Star and for years, and then saying, "Well, I didn't even think about it. I mean, why would I even think?" I mean, it doesn't even pass the laugh test. Now you go back and look. Obviously, we've had people, Richard Blumenthal, senator, Democratic senator, embellished his record in Vietnam, still got elected. And so it can happen. But what this reminds me of? This reminds me of Mark Kirk from Illinois. If you remember, Mark Kirk served as a naval intelligence officer, but embellished his resume just enough to the point where it became a huge issue for him in that election. And the Chicago Tribune and all these reporters like made a big deal about it. And it ended up being one of the factors that I think caused him to lose. And so, look, if he had come out before and said, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have had this on there. It was a mistake. Feel really bad about it." But he just sort of plowed through it. And now he's too far gone. He can't say it now because he's already on record 4 or 5 times saying, that it's not a big deal. It was just a paperwork snafu. And he did get it in what, 2024, Carl? I think Biden.
Yeah, it sounds like on his way out the door.
Yeah, no, he
something
did,
like that. And
they
and here's
realized
the
he'd
thing.
been saying this, and then they had to give it to him. Is how it looks like.
Yeah, I
mean,
mean,
it's not a good look.
No, and I was going to say, and I should say, I thought I like Westmore. I think he's actually a very promising politician. He's a charismatic guy, and I thought he might be one of the sort of dark horse Democrats on the stage who could come and unite the party and all of that. But boy, this is going to be tough, in my opinion, to get over. Maybe he'll do it, but I would not bet that I would not bet in favor of that happening.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that he's really not that experienced a politician. So this looms large in his resume in a way that it wouldn't have been if he had been served 2 terms as a governor or that sort of thing. So I don't know how it'll affect him long term. I think he can recover from it. Like I say, I mean, he did serve. He served honorably. He did win a bunch of other medals.
presumably.
Do you think Democrats, if he's standing on a stage with 9 or 10 other Democrats who all want to be president, they're going to let this go?
No.
Yeah,
They're going to take a pass on it?
If one of them's won the Congressional Medal of Honor, I don't know. But Tom, it's not a party of war heroes right now, so I don't know.
Okay.
2 big-time politicians have decided not to run again. Jerry Nadler, a Democratic congressman from New York, Joni Ernst, Republican senator from Iowa. Different reasons, but let's start with Nadler. Carl, he was a leading liberal voice for 34 years. He told the New York Times that the decision that not to run again has to do with the fact that he's 78 years old. And he said this, he said, quote, "Watching the Biden thing really said something about the necessity for generational change in the party. I think I want to respect that." And he added that a young successor, quote, "can maybe do better and can maybe help us more." So what do you think of Nadler's decision not to run at 78?
Well, I'm not in favor of mandatory retirement ages. The libertarian in me doesn't want mandatory anything, but what we've had these last 2 presidents, they get to be 78, and it's sort of start to go off the rails. This is what Nadler's looking at, and he surprisingly admitted it. He'd be 80 before his term, then his next term started or close to it, and that probably is too old. He's always been a leading liberal voice, but also a very partisan, very harsh Democrat, very mean-spirited rhetoric, not just towards Trump, but towards George W. Bush. He's lately, he was a staunch defender of Israel early in his career. He's lately been, kind of bashing Israel and parroting some of the Hamas lines. So I think it's time.
Well, look, Jerry Nadler was never the sort of picture of health. And so I think it's a good decision for him to not overstay his welcome. Carl's right. I mean, Jerry Nadler was he made fascism cool. Well, remember, I just never forget that. A whiff of fascism. There's a whiff of fascism about. This is back in the Bush era days. Yeah, he was talking about fascism well before Donald Trump came on the scene for, about Republicans. So, um, we do need younger people in Congress. I think that, we have too many people who stay too long, and I'm not necessarily in favor of mandatory age requirements either. I do when people make that argument though, I can see the case. I mean, we don't want people staying there until they're, carted out, or sleeping through votes and their young 24-year-old staffers are, running the show. So it's probably a good decision on his part. And also, I mean, we talk about what happened with Biden. People were always wondering. Trump, just this past weekend, Trump disappeared for like 24 hours and people thought he was dead. So it was like tearing up the internet. Trump's dead. He's not, obviously. But when you have, think when you have leaders that are that old, it kind of, their health, speculation about their health becomes more of a thing.
Yeah. But well, let's talk about Joni Ernst then. Not an age-related thing. She's just after, I guess, 2 terms, decided to hang it up. She opposed Pete Hegseth's nomination. Ended up voting for him. Wasn't happy with the Doge cuts. Tom, just was it just was she just fed up with what's going on Capitol Hill and it was time to move on?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, she definitely got crosswise with the MAGA base on Pete Hegseth. And in fact, she gave an interview to Phil Wegman, our Phil Wegman, during that time where she said, came out and said, listen, I'm not, I just have concerns and we're going to work through them. And I'm not against, Trump's nominees and I'm not against Hegseth. So yeah, I don't know. 2 terms in the Senate is a long time. And, there are people who love the Senate and stay forever, and there are people who go to the Senate and they just can't stand it because there's just not a lot getting done there. They would do a lot of talking, but not much of anything else. And so, look, this will be open seat for Republicans, but obviously Iowa's a red state now. I would think the Republicans are going to be they'll be well positioned to hold that seat. So I'm not sure it's going to have any electoral impact, but it is a bit surprising for someone. That was I don't know that anybody had that one on their bingo card as of a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, she did say this odd thing, though, Carl. It made some news when she was at a town hall and they were talking about the Medicaid cuts, and she just said, well, we're all going to die. Got a lot of attention. She wasn't raising a lot of money. It seemed that there were some tea leaves that maybe she had just had it with the whole thing.
Yeah, she may just be tired of the job for the reasons Tom said. But the other thing, Tom reminds me of something when he says, it's probably still a Republican state, probably. But I had a lesson in humility about predicting the future, and it involved Joni Ernst. And when she ran the first time, we had an intern in our office who he didn't wear socks. He showed up at the office. Not only didn't have a laptop, didn't have a pen or a piece of paper to write with. He once tried to go to the White House and didn't even have his ID on him and couldn't figure out why they wouldn't let him in the White House. So he was a little bit spacey, but he did an interview with Joni Ernst, and she was unknown at the time and little known. And he talked to some people in Iowa, and he said, and she was 2% in the polls, and he came in and wrote a story. I think we ran it. I should dig it out. Basically making the case that she was a viable Senate candidate, and it turned out to be right. So the point is that, none of us know what's going to happen in the future, but we also have to, pay attention to the grassroots and to new people coming up. And this fits into what we were saying about Jerry Nadler. I mean, whoever it is, probably going to be a younger person, fresh ideas. Sometimes the young people who make the most noise in Washington, the Jasmine Crockett types aren't always a good ambassador for the generation. But we do need new blood in the Senate, and that's a good thing.
Let's remember, Carl, one of the reasons that Joni Ernst won, she ran one of the best ads that I've ever seen in political history
Yeah.
about castrating hogs. Remember that? And she said she's going to make the pigs in Washington squeal or something. It was like she's going to go cut their nuts off. It was great. It was like it was pitch perfect for the time and for
She
her
was a
as a
breath
woman.
of
I mean, it
fresh
was
air. That's right.
yeah, it was a great ad.
Tom, President Trump called on drug companies to, quote, justify their success against COVID-19. He did this in his Truth Social. He demanded they release data on the effectiveness of the vaccines. And he also described the CDC as being, quote, ripped apart over this question. So, Tom, what is the president asking for here? And does he really expect the drug makers to make their case to the public? Is that what's going on?
Well, he does. I mean, this was fascinating. So he puts up this post over the weekend and he says, look, because, Trump loves to take credit for, or wants to, has wanted to in the past, take credit for Operation Warp Speed and the development of these vaccines in record time. And, his base was not thrilled about it. And so it's one of those things he's always pissed off that he can't talk about it because he thinks it's a real achievement of his. But whenever he mentions it, it kind of gets him in trouble with the MAGA base. But what he said in this post was that the drug companies have shown him these amazing numbers, these amazing results, but they haven't shown the public anything. And he was like, "Why is that? Why hasn't the public seen the amazing statistics that I've seen?" And so he's basically saying, "Look, you need to the drug companies, you need to make this information public to the public and let them see these amazing results that you've showed me." And so it's a remarkable call for transparency on the part of the president to these powerful drug companies. And so we'll see what happens. But we ran it at the top of the site along with a piece from some CDC directors that ran in the New York Times this morning and a Wall Street Journal piece by Marty McCary on the FDA and the COVID boosters. So it's a huge issue and one that sort of just, it's been boiling out there, obviously, with the turnover and the chaos at the CDC, but really sort of popped up over the weekend. And I'll be interested to see how this plays out.
Yeah, Carl, I mean, it does seem like, this lack of belief in numbers. It's something we've been talking about across the board now for, last 3 or 4 months. Government statistics, people just don't trust them anymore. Is this part of that? And, if Pfizer comes out with numbers, is anyone going to believe Pfizer?
Well, it's a good question, Andy, but it's very much a part of that, which is that the CDC refused to release data. I don't know if they've still done it on the side effects of these vaccines and people who were harmed by side effects. And most people still believe, maybe not the loudest voices in the MAGA base, but most people still believe many lives were saved by these vaccines. But maybe there were lives that were cost. Maybe there were people who took the vaccine and didn't need it and paid terrible health care. So, but the CDC hasn't been wanting to release that data. I don't even know if they have it. So, but Trump's central problem with this, and the central problem it's not just his problem, is what Tom was saying. It's like that old, remember the movie Annie Hall? I think it won Best Picture, Woody Allen romantic comedy with he and Diane Keaton. It starts out, Woody Allen sort of comes out on stage and says his favorite joke, it's Borscht Belt humor, is these two ladies in the Catskills at this resort, and one of them says, "The food here is terrible," and the other said, "Yes, and the portions are so small." This is Trump's dilemma. God, I don't get any credit for this vaccine that I pushed to call, and my most loyal followers don't think the vaccine worked.
That is the problem, isn't it, Tom? I mean, would he, in his private moments, do you think he would like to take more credit for what was viewed at the time as this scientific breakthrough that everyone on all sides, Project Warp Speed, was considered sort of just, like a moonshot. And at the time, it was that they'd come up with this vaccine with this new technology so quickly, was considered remarkable. And now, in retrospect, people are thinking it was either harmful or not effective. I mean, those are the two views that you're getting, right?
Right. No, it's totally true. And Trump, I've heard this from multiple people who have been in the room with Trump where he, sort of says, talks about, he saved 100 million lives and he can't talk about it because, and you remember that for a while he said a couple times publicly that he had taken the vaccine and he urged other people to take it, and
You
that
don't
didn't
hear
go
that
over well. So
anymore,
he
do you?
stopped, yeah, he stopped talking about that. It is one of those things. It's a conundrum for him because he does, I mean, I guess you got to go back to the time when people were the sort of panic of COVID and this idea that we needed a solution. I think the problem originated from Anthony Fauci and the public health establishment, which decided, to the exclusion of all other opinions about this, that the only way out was to vaccinate our way out. So we had to have vaccines and we had to give them to everybody. And we had to give them boosters and we told everybody how great they were and how you just take this vaccine and you'll never get COVID again. And that turned out not to be true. And so there's immediate distrust. And then all of the stuff with the harmful side effects that Carl talks about. I mean, I can promise you, everybody listening to this podcast right now knows at least one person, probably more than one, within their circle of family and friends who's suffered harmful side effects from this vaccine. I know, I've got at least two, maybe more, that I've come in contact with. So that's why there's distrust about this. That's why it was an achievement in that we got the vaccines or the mRNAs to market that fast. But in retrospect, that was the problem. Maybe we got them. Maybe we rushed them to market too fast before we had done enough testing to make sure that they were as safe as they could and should be.
Tom, I would say one more thing about that. I think the mistrust began earlier, and there were two things going on. One is very early in the game, Tony Fauci went on television and told people not to buy masks, not to wear them. That wouldn't do any good. Remember, they were, scrubbing your groceries and stuff. It was obviously
Oh
airborne, but
yeah,
they were sort of slow to realize this. And then, and then he said, just in a matter of weeks later, switched and said, "Do buy masks." And when asked about the discrepancy, he sort of blurted out the truth. He said, "I didn't want there to be a run on masks."
yeah,
And I was watching this briefing, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I thought, does he realize what he's just done? This
yeah.
he
And then
people
it was wear two masks and three
People,
masks.
people weren't going to believe then. Then you were gaming me. What he
Right.
said made logic. It was logic, but it didn't understand. He didn't seem to realize what he had squandered. And then the second thing was, what you said, Tom, they're going to close this. Remember, they were going to stop the spread. They're going to close the schools, and then and you couldn't do anything. You couldn't go to funerals. But then when the Black Lives Matter protests started, then CDC people said, "Yeah, this is more important." So
Right.
and so again, the public, if you were a discerning member of the American public, said, "Wait a minute, these people, they're just saying whatever comes in their head." So I think long before the vaccine had been developed, months before it had been developed, discerning people had developed a suspicion of what they were hearing from the government and specifically from the CDC.
Well, we just have a few minutes left in this block, and I do want to talk about this poll that came out,
Hmm.
Gallup, talking about people's beliefs and parental concerns, apparently, about children's safety in schools has increased over the past 4 years. 41% of parents now say they are concerned for their students' physical safety while at school. The long-term average since 98, according to Gallup, has been 34%. So this is a bit of a bump. Tom, same time, 15% of parents say their school-age child are concerned about feeling unsafe. So apparently the kids feel safer than the parents. What do you make of the poll? And it's back to school. You've got kids back in school, right?
I do. They just went back to school last week and the week before last. And yeah, I mean, you see what happened in Minneapolis and continues to happen at schools around the country. And I think that's why that's one of the reasons I think that parents are afraid. Obviously, there's concerns about bullying, there's concerns about, other things, but certainly school shootings, because they're so prominent, they get so much coverage. We fixate on them, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but that's just, it becomes part of the, parental lizard brain for that instinctive desire to protect your kids. And when you send them back into that environment, that reflex kicks in.
Yeah. I mean, Carl, what do you make of it? I mean, I read this Education Week said 50 people were killed or injured in school shootings in 2024. 108 were killed in school bus accidents. I mean, you can imagine where these statistics go. I mean, your chances of being in a school shooting are pretty small, but that is what people are concerned about. And that's what spikes. It's clear from these Gallup numbers. That's what spikes parental concern.
Well, yeah, but Tom's point is the right one. If we gave as much news coverage to school bus accidents as we do shootings, I don't think people would be less afraid of school shootings. They'd be more afraid of bus accidents, and that number 41% would be
Go even
50%.
higher. Right.
Yeah, but I also think there's just things going on in the public school, in all schools that parents worry about that they might not have worried about. They worry about more now. I mean that these numbers of Gallup now have held steady for 4 years. This is a historic level of concern among parents. But you know, will they teach my kids? Will my kid learn to read? If you go
Well,
to
that was not what
no, 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 no. I'm just saying. I think when they ask these
I
questions
gotta wrap this up
about
Carl.
school safety, I think people will they teach them to hate
Carl's about
Jews?
to go on a
Will they
10-minute
teach
jag
Will they
here.
teach them to hate America? Yeah. Will they be
Clearly,
bullied?
I looked at
will
this
they
poll very
join a-
carefully. That
will
poll
they-
had nothing to do with that. But
Will
go
they
ahead.
join a gang? No, I just think it's not just school shootings. I think they're worried about their kid out there in this tough world with adults who may or may not, share their values.
All right. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Hey, when we come back, I'm going to be talking with Sean Trendy about the Democrats and the primary schedule. So that's pretty interesting stuff. Sorry to cut you off, Carl. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andy Walworth. I'm with Tom and Carl. Be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me now is Sean Trendy. He is RCP's senior elections analyst. Sean, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Sean, I wanted to talk to you today because this month, the Democratic Party is going to formally begin the process of setting the presidential nominating calendar for 2028, basically deciding which states will hold their primaries and in what order. So let's start there. Why is the order of primaries important? And I guess it's mostly about the very early primaries, right?
Yeah, we're already talking about 2028. I still haven't washed 2024 off my skin completely, but yeah, there's kind of two reasons it's important. One is the question, it's important for the candidates, and that's one we probably want to drill down on. I think each of these are worth drilling down on separately. It's important for the candidates, but it's also important for the voters of the states that get to go first. You know, the states that go first play a huge role in winnowing the field. If you go last, your voters may not even have a choice. The primary might not last that long.
Yeah, and then in turnout, I mean, if you're at the end of the primary season, I mean, why even bother if it's been decided, right?
That's right. And there's secondary considerations. One of the reasons, and I think this is pretty well accepted, that Bernie Sanders stayed in as long as he did in 2000 was that there was a special election for the Wisconsin Supreme Court on the Wisconsin primary day. And so they wanted to keep interest, keep turnout high on that so that their Supreme Court candidate would win. So there are even tertiary considerations on this.
So let's just start with South Carolina, because that's sort of that and New Hampshire are two very interesting states when it comes down to this stuff. It was key to Biden winning the nomination in 2020. And then they were rewarded in 2024 where they went first, right? The idea was, partially to reward them for giving Biden the White House the first time around, but also to have more black voters represented early in the process. So is that equation still sort of a live consideration for the Democrats this time around?
Well, not so much obviously helping Biden out. I don't think he'll be running again, but it is a question of what do you want your early primary voters to look like. Traditionally, it was Iowa and New Hampshire, which are, overwhelmingly white, not particularly swing statey, although neither is South Carolina. But the idea is that, especially in 2020, we were kind of in the the midst of our critical theory hype, the idea of trying to bring people of color into the Democratic nomination process was very popular. Today, though, it's still popular. Black voters are still a huge portion of the Democratic base, and they slipped away some in 2024, which makes Democrats nervous. So there will be, I think, a push to keep it that way, although I think there will also be some candidates who would rather it not be that way.
And so New Hampshire, which everyone thinks of as being first in the nation, and as a matter of fact, has a state law which says they have to be first in the nation. They would like to go first again, obviously, and I guess they will go first again. But the last time they went first, it was an unsanctioned primary, and Biden wasn't even on the ballot. I mean, he was a write-in. So how is New Hampshire looking at this, do you think?
I think there's some dismay over it, that they've gotten bumped down. Iowa too, I think, would very much like to not be to be one of the first places to go. They're just not representative of where the Democratic Party is, and there's also big picture considerations of the type of candidate who would emerge from that. Not necessarily a person of color or a white candidate. Remember, Barack Obama won the almost all white Iowa caucuses, launching his 2008, launching his presidency, really. But those voters in Iowa and New Hampshire tend to be much more progressive than black voters in South Carolina, and even white Democrats remaining in South Carolina. So it shapes the ideology of the candidate that can emerge.
Yeah. We'll talk about Iowa for a second, because Iowa's problem is not only that they're too white, but they're kind of incompetent. They have a lot of trouble counting votes, and that really has hurt them.
Yeah, I still don't know who won the 2020 caucuses. Is it Buttigieg? Is it Sanders? I don't know. Look, the Iowa caucuses are just kind of a mess. It's something that in the zeitgeist of the 60s and 70s made a lot of sense to have it go early on. But today you don't really want, kind of the most dedicated, hardcore left-wing activists to be the ones to decide who the president is going to be.
It matters to the candidates, doesn't it, how this sort of shapes out? Because different candidates would do better in certain states than others. And also, depending on those early primaries, you would have a different strategy, where you spend your money, where you spend your time, where you get your support. So a lot's at stake for the Democrats this time around. And like I say, it's an open field. You don't have sort of an incumbent like Biden who, people assume that he's going to win the nomination. It's a jump ball. So it wouldn't really matter which candidates do you think are hoping that New Hampshire goes early? Which ones are hoping that South Carolina goes early?
Well, I can tell you the one candidate that does not want South Carolina, or the prospective candidate, I suppose we should say, that does not want South Carolina to go early is Pete Buttigieg. In poll after poll, and this is just, we can speculate why. I certainly have strong theories, but he has gotten 0% of the black vote. Zero. Right. There's no error margin there when it's zero. And so it's, an overwhelmingly black state like South Carolina is a death trap for Buttigieg. Whereas someplace like New Hampshire, where it's going to be white progressives dominating the field, he probably plays very well. On the flip side, someone like Kamala Harris, Wes Moore. But those are candidates that I'll admit, like, I'm coming up with because they are black, but that didn't make the difference in 2020. It's not like Cory Booker became the nominee because he won South Carolina because he was black. It was Joe Biden. So we shouldn't be too racially reductionist about this, but a more moderate candidate, a more sensible candidate, however you want to frame it, those are the candidates who tend to do well in South Carolina because black voters are more conservative, oddly enough, perhaps, than their progressive white counterparts.
Are you nostalgic at all about New Hampshire, though? Because, I grew up in New England. I went to school in Boston. The New Hampshire primaries and, traipsing through the snow and the sort of meeting people, coffee houses or diners, that sort of thing, that sort of retail politics is maybe it's a myth, but that sort of was one of the things that sort of people still talk about New Hampshire as being sort of a plus. In other words, you can go up there, not be a national figure, but if you put in the work and you get known, you can do well in New Hampshire, and that can move you up in the game. Do we lose something if we aren't sort of letting New Hampshire sort of lead the way?
Yeah, I mean, Iowa's a small state. It's got 4 congressional districts. New Hampshire has 2. South Carolina isn't a huge state, but it has 6. It's a much more substantial investment to try to win in South Carolina. Now, frankly, in a world where, online donations means you can easily raise $3, $4, $5 million, where you really kind of just need a billionaire to fund a super PAC for you to get airtime, it's not exactly the same. But I think the type of skills that a place like Iowa and New Hampshire reward are good skills for a president to have, being able to connect with ordinary Americans. And that's going to be absent when it's just an air war in South Carolina.
Yeah. And what about Nevada? We haven't talked about Nevada, but that's another state that went early. People point to Nevada because it's 30% Hispanic, and I guess it's fairly unionized. I mean, and it's the furthest west of the sort of 4 states that we're talking about here. Is it early enough, if they're sort of number 4, that it still matters, or by then are people sort of looking at Super Tuesday and moving on, and it's sort of we're on to the primary season, full stop?
It's interesting that it doesn't get as much attention, but of the 4 that we talk about, it's the only one that's really truly a swing state, so it's one you would want your candidates to be able to prove that they can do well in. The white vote there is more blue collar. It's got a substantial blue collar Hispanic vote. You wonder if someone, again, you don't want to be too reductionist, but AOC perhaps plays a little better there than she might in South Carolina, where you have a more conservative electorate. So yeah, you would expect it to get more hype, but it does tend to get glossed over as we look towards the big prizes of Super Tuesday.
Last question. What about the Republicans? I mean, is there any drama at all on the Republican side, or are they just going to go Iowa, New Hampshire the way they did last time around? And I guess, but again, there'll be an open. It'll be open on both for both parties. So I guess depending on who's running on the Republican side, the primary calendar could matter. But is there any drama at all on the Republican side at this point?
Republicans kind of have a "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" attitude. And unlike the Democrats having white in Iowa, white evangelicals; in New Hampshire, white seculars; then South Carolina, you get Southern, more populist-y whites. Like that calendar makes sense. It makes more sense for the Republican coalition than for Democrats. Is there going to be a Republican nomination battle? Well, there certainly will be one. Whether it's going to be more like 2016 or 2024, where it's kind of a phony war, that remains to be seen. We'll have to see how Donald Trump is faring in the Republican Party in 2027. I imagine he's going to be doing quite well, because at least within the Republican Party, because that's what he's done for a decade, which would seem to make things easier for J.D. Vance.